Hey everyone, what's up? It's Babylonius from WalkingTheWind.com here with another video guide slash podcast slash live Q&A session. So today's topic is going to be all about the user interface, or the UI, for anyone who didn't actually know what UI meant. It's something that I've been relatively passionate about for a long time. As you'll get to see in a second, I've spent a lot of time on my UI over the last couple years. A lot of research into what other people are doing, what people think is important, and stuff like that. So I don't want to say I'm an expert, but I certainly have spent a lot of time on my own UI, so I like to think I have at least somewhat of an idea. I am a little bit sick. I am a teacher, and there's a lot of illnesses going around the elementary school, so I'm trying to survive and not catch any of the stomach flu, respiratory infection, anything like that. So a lot of kids are out, so I'm trying to avoid it as much as I can. So hopefully I don't sniffle too much or cough throughout the video. So let's get started. So the first thing I think is important and always good for a nice laugh is I went through and I found as many screenshots of my old UIs as possible. I've been playing Warcraft since the early middle of Burning Crusade, and so I have had various different UIs. So these are the farthest ones I could find backwards. I couldn't find any from BC when I was playing my mage. This one is December 2009. I was on my paladin. As you can see, I believe that's CLC Ret. It was one of the more early rotational helpers. It was specifically developed for Ret Pallies. If you can tell by my gear, this was, I believe, right around the Trial of the Crusader period in time. That was when I spent really any time as Ret. So you can look at my UI I was playing on my laptop at the time. Pally Power's up in the top right there, and stuff like that. So I was primarily a healer and a tank, which is why the raid frames are in the middle. And at the moment, I was just trying to learn Ret, hence why I had the rotational helper on. So this was 2009 in December. Then just a couple months later in February, this is again, me all set up as Ret. This is based on the WeakAuras, or those two skull icons, if I remember correctly. I could be wrong, but they are, let me see, judging by the people I'm in, it was something. So those were probably very early WeakAuras. I spent a lot of time on the red frames. That was something I was particularly obsessed with. So you can see that was just a couple months later. A couple months later again, I started experimenting with some viewport add-ons, which, if you don't know, they squish your screen so that the edges of the screen that you can see here was actually the edges of the screen normally. I squished the screen, which gave me some of this extra real estate to play with. Again, it was on a laptop, so it wasn't perfect. But this is Ice Crown. September 10th, I decided to apparently change up the color scheme and got rid of the viewpoint stuff. So then you got January 2011. I was still on my paladin at the time. So I'm not sure exactly when this was in terms of what raids were out. It looks like the first part of Cata, judging by the guild message with Chimeron and Maloriak. So this was the end of Cataclysm. This was when I was on my paladin. This is probably one of the last pictures on my paladin, but this was when my UI really started to kind of hit a more consistent type. I started using LVUI and stuff like that way back in 2012 in April, maybe even before that. So this was my Death Knight. This was at the beginning of Mist, pretty much right before I switched to Monk. I believe I took this picture to apply to a guild that I would then switch to Monk for. So then here I am in, this is Throne of Thunder raid. This is July 2013. So you can start to see a little bit of a pattern between my UIs. This is when I started designing really my own WeakAuras sets. A lot of people have been using mine. So this is kind of when they started, January 14, March 2015. This is in an ugly gear set. Apparently I took this picture while spec'ing Mistweaver for some reason. I didn't spend a lot of time as Mistweaver, but there you go. So this is March 2015. June 2016, as you can see, really not a huge difference. I moved the raid frames over And then this was just the other day, February 2017. So you can see not a ton of difference between one or the other. Just a couple things, I guess, taken out. So as you can see, to get kind of an idea of what what everything is, this was kind of on a blank screen. So this is what my UI looks like. This is what is kind of in the important spots. I've got my buffs in the top right or top left. That's kind of where they always were as a default. So that's where I left them, chat frames, raid frames, and stuff like that. So you can see where I've positioned some stuff. A lot of the stuff is just kind of based on where it was in the base UI. And I just kind of kept it there. I did move the focus frame up top, and I used my focus frame to track the boss health. I've just never gotten used to using the boss frames, which are over on the right now that LVUI provides them. But it's a huge monster frame that I can set for the boss so that I know if he's casting or anything much better. So this is kind of the map to what my UI looks like currently. As you can see, it really, you can kind of go back and forth. So the most important thing, and I believe when designing your UI, is negative space. If you don't know what negative space is all the blank space that you don't have anything there. As you can see, there's a lot of negative space on my UI. I like a more minimalistic UI. A lot of people like a lot more information. I don't raid lead or anything like that, so I don't need certain things like the cooldown timers of when the other, some monks got a revival or a tranquility or something like that. I don't need that information, so I don't have that information. So negative space is anything that's not covered by UI element, because if it's covered by UI element, if it's raid frames, chat frames, targets, whatever, WeakAuras, that's something that you can't see through unless you specifically set it to do so. So that's a blind spot, and any blind spot is bad. I mean, it's a potential spot for something that can kill you to get there. So what I like to do is make kind of a safety bubble. I believe that you really want to be able to see your character. So as you can see, this is zoomed out, but this is as far out as I zoom in my normal raid. So I can see my character, I can see his feet, I can see some of the area around it. I can see if the boss is up towards the focus frame. Up here I can see where the boss is and stuff like that. There's a lot of extra space to see where ads are. I like keeping this space down here open for the same reason, to make sure there's not some fire or anything coming from one direction or another. So that's negative space. I think negative space is something that is not really talked about a lot in UI guides. But I think it's very important. I think you really want to maximize the information you get and the information you need while maximizing the amount of negative space, the amount by minimizing the amount of space that it takes up. So a big part of that is WeakAuras. WeakAuras is, in terms of your UI, just about the most important add-on that exists. You can program it to be raid frames. I've seen people make raid frames out of it, target frames, player frames, buffs, debuffs, resource trackers. It can mimic boss mods. I mean, WeakAuras is just about the most flexible add-on that exists. So, I mean, it can be customized to fit any UI. I always recommend to anyone who asks about my WeakAuras and stuff like that, that they look at examples and take examples. If they like my UI suite, my group of WeakAuras, that they just take the function of it and they adapt it and make it look the way that they want, because my WeakAuras and my UI are designed to work together. People have asked about the bars of cooldowns under my WeakAuras, and I have to tell them that that's just the action bars from LVUI. So, my WeakAuras are designed for me. I don't design them for other people. There are people who do that, and some people who do very beautiful jobs in terms of WeakAura artwork and stuff like that. That's not me. But it's really very easy just to take the function and then just change the look. So, there are more complex things. When we wanted to figure out the Serenity timer, that was very popular, that helped a lot of people with Serenity. That was very complicated, and it was way over my head, so I had to ask the help of Rivers and MJ Mike and a couple other people. So it can be very complicated, but somebody could have taken that WeakAura and they could have changed the button, they could have changed the size, they could have done whatever they want with it. So you can very easily find the function that you're looking for, even if it's something for another class, and just tweak it to look how you want or to do what you want. So there's years worth of references for people who want to use WeakAuras, but it can be very intimidating at first. And really the last thing is that everybody's doing it. We got on one of our tanks cases because he was raiding without WeakAuras, and we use WeakAuras to do a lot of stuff, like telling you that you're standing in bad shit. Or, WeakAuras can make a noise when you're standing in bad shit or something like that. So WeakAuras is just, if I could pick anything that would be a essential UI element, I think WeakAuras would definitely be it. So, next, decisions. Decisions. You have to decide when you're building UI, do you want to use something that's from scratch? Do you want to start with the base UI and then just go? Build it with whatever add-ons you need and stuff like that? Or do you want to use a UI suite or a UI group like ElvUI or TookUI or Shadowed? I can't remember a lot of the other more popular ones. Gladius, there's tons of them. Pre-built UI stuff. And there are pros and cons to each. I mean, if you build from scratch, you can build it perfectly for what you want, what looks you want, what function you want, where you want things to go. If you're going to use a UI suite, you might be somewhat limited in some of the function. You may need to have additional add-ons on top of what the UI suite does. So it may not be a one-size-fits-all. Some add-ons, or some UI suites, like I use ElvUI as my base, they have additional kind of add-ons to the add-on that you can add extra stuff to, and if you want to change colors or stuff like that, UI suites have a lot of flexibility with that. They're also good with at the next point, which is you have to decide whether you want your UI to be specifically set up for this character, for this role, or just in general. I've always been a big proponent of keeping things as uniform as possible between any characters and roles that you're playing. So if for example, I don't play a lot of other alts, but when I did and when I do, their UIs are all set up very similar to my monks. The cooldowns are in the same spot, even so far as the interrupts are in the same spot, or like on my mage, blink is in the same spot as roll on my monk. Because they're both short distance movement speeds, or counter spell for an interrupt, or a stun on another character might be in the same spot as stun on my monk. So it it really I like that. Other people, you can very much look at, they can get used to each character having its own specific stuff, and when you set it up specifically for a character, then you can get more of that customization. You don't have to think, this might be a good spot for my monk, as Windwalker, but it would be a bad spot for my monk as Mistweaver. A lot of UI suites, and I think even some of the base UI stuff, can be switched depending on the spec. I know ElvUI have a profile for tanking, a profile for healing and stuff, and basically what that does is it moves my raid frames more into a more prominent spot, since they're more important as a healer or a tank than as a DPS. So, some UI suites, that can be an advantage to them. And these are all personal decisions that you have to make when crafting your UI. The next thing is the eternal question: bigwigs versus DBM. Everyone has their preference. I've used both of them. I think they're both fine. I've used DBM the most. DBM is Deadly Boss Mods, for anyone who doesn't know. Bigwigs was long kind of the preferred choice of the high end, but there really is very little difference. There have been times where DBM has been better or more frequently updated than Bigwigs, so everyone has their preference. There really isn't a big thing. And then this last point is action bars. A lot of people are big proponents about hiding your action bars. And what that does is that increases the amount of negative space. If your action bars are not on your screen, then that's extra space. I tried it. I've tried it on even going so far as back to my Paladin, when the rotation could be set to one button. It was called the 969 rotation. And you could set it to literally one button or two buttons. And even back then, I liked being able to see what was coming next, or seeing my cooldowns. I've seen some people who have hid their action bars, but then made WeakAuras to show the cooldowns of these abilities, and I don't really understand what the point of that is, because then you're just hiding the action bar, but then replacing the action bar with the WeakAuras, which is more complicated to make and takes a little bit longer time. So I believe that you should show your action bars. You can move them out of the way. You can make them big and small. As you saw on my UI, and I'll show it again in a little bit. I have a set of action bars with my rotation buttons, my Fist of Fury, Rising Sun Kick, Jab, Tiger Palm, stuff like that. I have a small row of bars above it with my more important cooldowns, Energizing Elixir, Zuen, Storm, Earth, and Fire, stuff like that. And then at the bottom I have another set of cooldowns. That's where I have my stuns and my interrupts, stuff that I have well mapped into my muscle memory, but I don't quite need to be tracking the cooldown as closely. If I have an interrupt and I know I just used it, then I know it's going to be up for a while. I'm not going to be able to use it. Same with a stun. Whereas, tracking the cooldown of Energizing Elixir, I also have a WeakAura for that. So it's good. I like just having it. It's just a comfort thing for me, but a lot of people choose differently. So UIs are very personal. It's one of the reasons why I wrote a UI guide for the site as one of the first posts almost 2 years ago, and I never quite finished it because it's always been a very difficult. The more time I spend thinking about UIs, the more I want to tweak my own. But my UIs has been pretty stable for the last 3 or 4 years at least, when I used to change it almost on a monthly basis. So what's most important, and I'm back to the tier list because I think it went really well with the legendaries, but where does everything go? So when you're looking at what you have and what you need, you can split things up into what you need to see every second of the fight, what you're constantly monitoring, what you're monitoring frequently. Those are the things you want. Within an easy eye movement, you want to minimize eye movement when looking at your UI, and I'll get to that. Things you're occasionally monitoring, infrequently monitoring, rarely monitoring, almost never monitored, and then things that it doesn't matter, out of combat, stuff like that. So anything that is constantly monitored, you want in this personal, this what I called the safety bubble, and that's going to include your character's feet, the space around your character. So this kind of S bubble, that's going to be for the most important things, because that's where you're going to be spending the most amount of time looking at the screen, or you should be, because that's your character, and your character is the most important thing on the screen. So anything that goes immediately around your character are going to be the things that are of the utmost importance that you're going to need to see constantly. So things that you're constantly monitoring: your character's feet, your resources, how much chi or energy you have, the encounter space itself, what is around your character. Is there fire? Is there a boss? Are there other targets? And your cooldown timers. Cooldown is very important for a Windwalker and for many classes. So that's going to be, in this S space, the space that you're constantly monitoring, are these things. So next we get to the A space. The A space is, like the S space, just kind of the next step out. And these are the things that you're going to be looking at pretty frequently, but not quite need them to be, as close in your peripheral as possible. The goal of any UI should be to minimize the amount of time you spend looking around. Because any time you're not spent looking at your character is time that you could be looking at, is time that you may be standing in fire, basically. If you're looking off in the top right corner because that's where you decided to put your cooldowns, like some kind of doofus, then you're not going to be looking at your character. There could be something happening that might kill you. So this A space is where you're going to put things like your target frame, your player frame, important action bars or WeakAuras. Those are any important cooldown, stuff like that. This is where you're going to put your boss mods, so you know what boss abilities are coming up shortly. So the A space are for things that are very, very important, but not critical, not absolutely the most important thing. The player frame, you can tell if you're losing some health. The target frame, every once in a while you're going to check it to make sure that you're still attacking the correct target. But in general, that's not you're not going to be staring at your target frame that much. The important action bars, if it's got cooldowns or ability stuff, that's something you're going to be watching. So you want to put all those things close enough that you can see them while you're looking at your character, but also you can see your character while you're looking at them. So next we get to the B space, and the B space again moves a little bit farther out. And the B space is going to be things like boss frames, any secondary action bars, focus frames if you're somebody who uses a lot of focus macros, or it's important, if your raid likes that you focus, keep track of something. I know I've seen a lot of people do that. But those are the frames that you're not going to be checking constantly. It may be a quick glance up, but you're not going to be staring at them. It's not going to be, you're not going to die if you don't look at them. Secondary action bars might be a longer cooldown, like a Zuen or a Energizing Elixir, things that you're not going to have to check every 5-10 seconds. You might be able to go 20-30 a minute without looking at it. So that's the B space. And then you got the C space. So the C space takes up a lot more space. These are things that you're going to want to have on your screen, but you probably shouldn't be looking at them all the time. That's things like your buffs and debuffs, threat tracker. As DPS, threat has not been a super big deal in years, but threat is always something you're going to want to make sure that if you're the next person on threat. So if a tank dies, that you're ready with a touch of karma, or to run the heck away, and try to kite the boss. So that's something that you still want to be in that area. Buffs and debuffs, I will include. I won't include important, fight specific debuffs, but you don't need to see if your wind walking buff is up, or what weekly quest it is, that you get buffs, stuff like that. So anything that should require a weak aura, that you really need to track a buff, like hit combo or stuff like that, that's going to be up in the A space or the S space, for those really important weak auras that you really want to be tracking all the time. But just general buffs and debuffs that are not super important, they can be off in the C space. Then you get to the D space, you start moving a little farther away. These might be kind of towards the corners of your screen. And the D space is going to be things like raid frames, because as a DPS, it's not super important for us. We should have them on our screen, but you're not going to be looking at them constantly, because you really should just be focusing on yourself. I mean, as a DPS, especially as a Windwalker, we don't have a lot of other stuff that we can do to other people. Obviously, if we need to be casting Tiger's Lust on someone, or if you want to be hitting someone with a Chi Wave, then that's fine, but that's not going to be happening all the time. So that's going to be fine to be off in the corner. So if you happen to look, if you need to look over there every minute, every 2 minutes, that's fine. You're not going to be taking a lot of time away from looking at your character. Those also things like mini-maps, you're not going to be checking your mini-map all the time. Sometimes you might be, but really not that frequently, or at least you shouldn't be, unless your guild for some reason uses the little pings that lights things up. So those are going to be the things that you can kind of slide off to the edge, but you still want them to have them on your screen. So the next one, E, these are going to be the corners. These are the things that you really don't need to have up during a fight, but you want it just because it's comfort, or because you like it, makes you feel good, or it looks pretty. The E space are going to be things that are really not essential. You're not going to be checking them during a fight. You just have them up because you like your UI during a fight to look the same as out of a fight. I don't know. Everyone has their preferences. These are obviously my own. But those are going to be things like your damage meter. Yes, your damage meter, it is underlined for a reason. And I don't follow the damage meter in the E rule. I match my damage meter with my threat tracker, so they're kind of on mirror sides of the screen. Things like your FPS, in-game chat, durability. Like, yeah, you might, if you died, for example, during a fight, you might want to know, is anything broken on my character? But you're not going to be able to do anything about that during a fight, really. I mean, unless you drop a Jeeves and equip, and that would be, or repair, and that would be kind of impressive. But in-game chat, most of the time you're not going to be monitoring that unless you have something to do with whispers, or if you're using some type of chat trigger to show that, okay, maybe it's your turn to interrupt. But if that's the case, you guys should be using player speak bubbles. FPS, if you notice, like, man, I'm lagging, it's useful to be able to look down and see, okay, well, yeah, my FPS is down low. But damage meters are really not super essential. There's not anything you're going to be able to do about it. If you're low, if you look at your damage meter and you're low, you can't fix that. All you can do is just keep doing the best that you're doing. So damage meters are, I've seen people with some UIs that you would think are basically designed around their damage meters. But damage meter is something that, yeah, you may glance at it once or twice during a fight just to make sure you're on track, or, oh my god, I really screwed the pooch. Let's hope, secretly hope that we wipe, or my rank is going to be very poor. So that E-space are things that you shouldn't be looking at. You may have a reason to, but you probably shouldn't. And then last, I didn't put the F-space on any picture because the point is that they shouldn't be there. Those are things that you really should only be worried about out of combat. How much gold you have, what's going on in Twitch chat, stuff like that. A lot of streamers will have two screens. That's fine. I think that's distracting. You're just asking to look over and then get blown up by some boss ability. Your quest log, that really doesn't matter. LVUI kind of hides it by default, so I can expand it if need be. But those are things that really there's no reason for them to have on your screen during a fight. So this, as you can see, this is my UI, and you can see I've stuck pretty roughly, to these ideas in terms of what stuff is where. Like I said, in the S space, that's where I have my WeakAuras, my important cooldowns and stuff like that. You can see that my damage is kind of in the D/C space, but that's because I don't check it very often. So you can see, and if you rewind the video, you can see my other UIs have all kind of followed a very similar pattern of keeping stuff in these spaces. So, I even have, for me, my WeakAura is up in the right corner. My buffs are up in the top left corner. They're not going to be super important. I'm not going to be looking at them that often, but it's nice to know. I also have under my mini map, I have a extra set of action bars, things that I really don't need to care about during a fight. But if I need, if I die and I want to use another augment rune, then that's there. Stuff like that. I have a button to summon my matching panda pet, which I think is very important for all Windwalkers, since you all should be Pandaren anyway. But this is how I've kind of stuck, the philosophy that I've stuck to setting up my UI. So hopefully it's been useful. I don't want to do that next yet. Hopefully it's been useful. I thought I put another copy of this, but this is kind of how I feel is important, and what type of things are important for your UI if you're setting up your UI. And really, the most important thing is that this UI is kind of the culmination, or I should say the most recent iteration of something that I've been working on for, as you saw earlier, since 2009 or easily earlier, 2008. So, UI should constantly be changing. When Legion came out, I moved a couple things around. When, if I'm asked to do a different job more regularly, then I'm going to be moving stuff around. So your UI should always be a reflection of you. It should be a reflection of what is important to you. If you really feel that you need to see, if you're somebody that say your tanks are not that great at grabbing threat, then maybe you want your threat meter to be a little bit more of a prominent space. If you, some people don't like having their player frame, they like just using their raid frames to see their player. That's fine. To each his own. Some people like to just use WeakAuras for absolutely everything. I've seen a UI that is entirely created out of WeakAuras, even down to the minimap, which was pretty amazing. I have no idea how they did that, but if you want to do that, then enjoy. But this is kind of my recommendation, about what is important for setting up, how to set up your UI, and really it boils down to the S space. The S space is the most important. And filling it with only the essential stuff and leaving as much space blank. The reason that I used the viewport add-on a long time ago was because I could condense the viewing space so that I had space for all this extra stuff on the outsides without cutting down on what I could see. I don't use that now. I do like stuff like this, but even down to my, as you can see at the bottom, my damage frames and my threat frames are see-through. My chat frame is see-through. That's all extra stuff that I can see. Even my chi bar is somewhat transparent when it's not, or my energy bar is somewhat transparent when it's not filled. So those are all things that I feel is important when creating your UI. So if you like this video or podcast or however you're listening, then please support walkingthewind.com. I will put a link to the donate page in the description. I'll also put a link to my my UI. There's a page on walkingthewind.com under authors, then under my name, and you can see the UI. There's a link to downloading my LVUI profile, as well as a link to my WeakAuras, which are all over WeakAuras online and stuff like that. So I do try to update them as frequently as I can. So if you do enjoy that, if you enjoy the other content that I provided, especially with all of these videos, then please, let me know. Let me know if any suggestions, things I could do better on future videos, because I'm still pretty new to this. And hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully it creates more, or it answers more questions than it creates. And if not, you know how to get at me through Discord and stuff like that. And always just check walkingthewind.com first. So thank you very much for watching or listening. And as always, I'm Babylonius from walkingthewind.com, and I hope you've enjoyed.